Of course, these are great investment projects, and in future, when they are completed, the index will be able to capture them and improve Ethiopia's score. Because focuses on infrastructure that is ready to use today, and even ready to use from 2012, projects that are under construction cannot be captured. I hope that that answers your question. We then have another two questions. There's the question regarding a report last year on the Africa Regional Integration Index. I would like to take this question if I may. So I think there may be a little confusion. 1 year ago, we had a side event at this conference that was giving a progress report and some emerging findings from the data set from this very project. We did produce a background document, but it wasn't the formal report. It was based on the same project, but it was just, it was an interim report, if you like. So since then, some of the indicators that were featured in that side event have been dropped. And just to note that even at that stage, it was a joint project of the three institutions, and we've been working together since July 2014. We put our heads together. Even though we've been thinking about it separately from an earlier stage. Then we had the final question, which was about the importance of trade and free movement. And did you want to take it?
On free movement?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Maybe I'll take the opportunity to provide a little bit more comments on a tool that was mentioned this morning and this afternoon that we launched last month, actually, at the Africa CEO Forum. It's called the Africa Visa Openness Index. So basically what we did was to collect information throughout the continent on the ease with which Africans could travel to other African countries, so intra-African travel. And we used three indicators, very simple ones. Does the country require visa at departure? So before you board the plane, you have to get a visa from the country where you aim to go to? Or can you get the visa on arrival? Or do you require no visa? You don't need no visas. There are some countries that don't require visas, for example, like Seychelles. Seychelles allow all African countries to visit free of visa. You basically sign an entry authorization form. So free movement of people is very important for us, but there are different dimensions, do you allow residency? Do you allow people to, do you allow visit, and for how long? So we wanted to keep it simple, and in the first step, simply focus on visa requirements. How easy is it to visit countries? And some quick findings. We found that Central and North Africa are some of the most restrictive regions in terms of traveling, and that the easier regions to travel for Africans are usually East and West Africa, followed by Southern Africa.
Thank you very much, Jean-Guy. Would anybody else like to come in on the first three questions that we heard?
Maybe just to add something on the data and the data regarding infrastructure. The bank has what we call the Africa Infrastructure Knowledge Program, which we use to collect data in all African countries on the performance of infrastructure systems and the roads, water supply and sanitation, ICT, energy supplies, and so on. So I think for the information you were talking about regarding Ethiopia, for instance, as William indicated, I think in terms of performance, it would score low on that if the infrastructure is in the process of just being constructed. So it won't score as high as infrastructure that is already completed. But we do have a program where all the countries are participating and we do collect data every other year in all these African countries. So for the next index, you will see, of course, updated information.
Thank you very much, Charles. Anything from David, from CAS, before we... Okay, then, ladies and gents, let's take the second round of 3 questions. So I see the lady towards the back of the room in the mauve jacket, and then there's Sir here in the front, and okay. So, Madam, please, would you like to ask a question?
Thank you very much. My name is Hope Moses Ashika, right, for Business Day in Nigeria. I just want to get more clarification on the visa requirements that you just mentioned now. And you just said Central Africa and North Africa are the most restrictive. They are the most restrictive. They are more restrictive in terms of visa requirements. So I want to understand what actually is the agreement after today's meeting on ease of getting a visa for trade or other purposes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And sir, if you want to ask a question.
Thank you again. My question is that when you come to the case of Aliko Dangote, the Africa's richest man, despite his possession of private jet, he is not allowed to travel to many African countries due to some security issues. So, what are those security threats that disallowed the movement of businessmen to invest in some other countries? Thank you.
Please.
First of all, thank you for the answer to my previous question relating to the report last year. This gives me a clarification because I thought that these were 2 different efforts. Now, an effort like this, is it going to be regularly published and updated every year? And to do that, I think that you need resources. It means you need resources. You need human resources all over Africa together, and most important, perhaps, you may need even regulations. Are they mandatory, the countries, to provide you the data that you will ask them to provide, or how are we going to do this on a regular basis, like the OECD publishes reports more regularly? This is a very important question for us, I think, to know that this is not only one shot and we will not know things in the future.
Thank you very much. Jean-Guy, perhaps you'd like to take the first 2?
Yes, just the ones on visa. I think the first question on what was the agreement on visas today. We didn't really have an agreement per se. You know, what we did was to show the findings and the data. The decision really lies on the policy, on the policymakers' side. The policymakers have to decide. What we showed is the levels of restrictiveness on the continent, who makes it easier for other African countries to give visas, and we showed the benefits, the impacts of being more open in terms of tourism, in terms of foreign direct investment, etc. But the ultimate decision is left to the policymakers of the respective countries. We are very pleased, of course, to see that, for example, Ghana has unilaterally opened up to all African countries. So from July onwards, all Africans will be able to have visas on arrival when traveling to Ghana. So that's just an example. On the issue of what are some of the security issues, I think the 2 that keep coming all the time is terrorism, really. It's mentioned very often, the issue of terrorism. And in many cases, there's also the issue of employment. Sometimes countries feel that if they open up, they'll be flooded by migrant workers. But the findings of our study was that when you do that, you close up a whole world in terms of the tourism that you could promote and how local communities could benefit from it, the number of events that could be organized in your country, the investors that are, turned off because they have to wait 3 weeks to apply for a visa. So when you weigh the benefits and the negative side of things, you might find that maybe the security issues are exaggerated, especially when you see some countries that open up, put systems in place, and don't really see any increase in security issues. I would like to use the example of Rwanda, who actually, it happened over the last 5 years. From one day to the next, they opened up to the rest of Africa, and they didn't see any change in terms of security issues, etc. And you have to think about it. Africa is really porous. Our borders are really porous, and people that come with terrorism in mind usually use other means to enter the country. They don't apply for visas. They don't come in and give their fingertips, etc. So that's just my take on security issues. Thank you.
Clarification here so that the journalists don't get something wrong, and that I'm not sure that the report says that Dangote has problems because he's a security risk, because that appears to be the interpretation here. It's just that with someone with enormous resources that's invested in about 15 African countries and still has problems, getting to African countries. There was no suggestion at all, at least from what I understood, that he posed a security risk to any country. And I would like you to actually, to reflect this in your report, if that was what you are thinking about. Dangote does not, and we at ECA did not say that, and the ADB and AU, we did not say that Dangote presents a security risk to any country. So please, No, but that's the question he asked, and the question reflects the interpretation of what was presented, and it's important to correct that. Okay.
Thank you.
Take on your question on the data, the resources for collecting information. In terms of collecting data, be it for the index or for any other development work that we do, the bank has a statistical capacity building program whereby we provide support to all African countries to help them build their capacity to generate timely and reliable data. Over the past 10 years or so, we've provided over $100 million in terms of grants to the countries in this area to build their capacity. And I think one of the other things we've done is to build the Africa Information Highway. I don't know if you've heard of it. If you do a Google, I think you'll find it. These are live data links we've provided to all African countries and sub-regional organizations to help improve data management and dissemination. And they use these links to provide, submit data to us and to other partners on the web. They don't need to send them via email anymore with Excel files. And so everything is sent to the Africa Information Highway, and we extract the data from there. So it makes it much easier for the countries to provide information. But to make it short, we do have focal points in all these countries. We work with all statistical offices, central banks, ministries of infrastructure, and so on, to collect the necessary information for the index and also for the other development work that we do. And we work in collaboration with the African Union and ECA on all these issues here.
Thank you very much, Charles. I just wanted to add one last point on for your questions about is the index going to be published regularly and so on. So I think it's a decision that we are going to. It is going to be an ongoing project. We are going to publish reports going forward and collect the data. Also, the exact periodicity is still under discussion. So are we going to do it every year, every 2 years? That's something we're still figuring out. We've just been focusing on getting the first one ready. But you can be assured that there will be another one coming to you, the next edition coming to you soon. So does anybody else want to add anything for this round of questions before we take perhaps a final round of questions? Okay, so ladies and gents, please, final round of questions. So I can see two. Madam with the dotted shirt, please.
Okay, mine number one is a request. If you can give us a brief on the two reports, just a summary of the two reports. Then number two on data collection. There's been a concern that countries submit not accurate data. Do you have a way to verify this data that countries give you, or how do you collect your data?
Okay, thank you very much. And sir, with the blue shirt.
Okay, thank you so much. I was just looking at the performance of Zimbabwe. It was average in all the other variables, except on productive integration, whereby it's one of the top-ranking countries in terms of its integration into the regional value chains. Maybe can you expand further, maybe to give the reasons behind that?
Okay, thank you very much. Perhaps would you like to take the first question?
Yeah, sure. On how we went about collecting the data, I think we mentioned it this morning. We worked through national statistical offices, and institutes. So we trained them. They then went on and collected data. And then at our level, it then went into a filtering mechanism. There was a team in the Economic Commission for Africa and the African Development Bank that basically reviewed the data, made sure that there weren't any counterintuitive results, and when there were, we really, dug deep to make sure that the data was sound. So it was the data collection was only one process. The really long process was actually the data validation, the part of validating the data, making sure that the results were clear, etc. But we relied heavily on national statistical institutes and offices that were nominated by the countries. For part of the data, we got it from public sources because in some cases we couldn't obtain it from the statistical agents with whom we were working. But once the data was collected, it was then processed through. It then went on to the validation stage, which was in many ways longer than the collection stage. So we feel pretty confident that the data we presented you today is clean and free of errors, because it's a lot of effort was put not only in collecting it but also validating it and making sure that there weren't any errors included. Sorry, for the briefs on the report, you can actually get it on the website, integrate-africa.org. So www.integrate-africa.org. There are a lot of short summaries of the different dimensions of the whole report itself. So if you don't feel like reading the entire report, you can just go to the sections that interest you. There are even country profiles. So you can click on your country and see the score that your country has in the different recs and the different dimension for the different indicators and so on. It's a very it's an interactive tool, and you can just drill down to the information that's of interest to you.
Thank you very much, Shongi. And just to add something, which is that I think we're working on a joint press release to publish very soon. So that will also, give you an overview of the report's significance. Just a very brief one. I'd actually like to come back to the question about Zimbabwe and its performance in productive integration. And so, as you may have seen in the presentation, we have 3 indicators within the dimension of productive integration. The first one is the score in this merchandise trade complementarity index, which measures the degree to which so in Zimbabwe's case, Zimbabwe's exports, so the distribution of its exports between the different products matches the distribution of imports by the other countries in the trade in the regional economic community. So how complementary are Zimbabwe's exports with those of the rest of the region? And those seem to be strong. Zimbabwe performs well on this indicator. The other 2 indicators that we have in this dimension are the share of intermediate goods in the country's imports from the rest of the region and the country's exports to the rest of the region, having taken out re-exports, I believe. Again, Zimbabwe has a high share of intermediates in its trade with the rest of the region. In fact, if you look at the ECA country profile on Zimbabwe, which I think is going to be launched tomorrow, and also if you go to, as Jean-Guy said, this website, integrate-africa.org, then and you go through to the Zimbabwe country page, then you can see some more details as to exactly what is driving this. But we felt that the share of intermediate goods in total intra-regional trade was a good proxy for the development of regional value chains, because why would you import a regional, why would you import an intermediate good unless you're going to be adding value to it? And so if you're importing intermediate goods from the region and then you're adding value to it, well, that's integration into a regional value chain. Similarly, if you're supplying intermediate goods to the rest of the region and then they're having value added to them there. So I wanted to ask Stephen and Charles if they would like to add anything in response to these 2 questions.
Very quickly, I think on the brief of the first report on innovation, competitiveness, and integration, I think that you asked the 2 reports. So this report, which is also a collaboration of the 3 institutions, was motivated by the following. Unless countries or a region or a sub-region is able to have intellectual property or innovate, then it would be very difficult to industrialize. It would be very difficult for you even to integrate yourself into the global value chains. So the whole question was, how can we use our regional integration platform to harness the power of innovation? And so this report basically makes that argument, and then it looks at what kind of global intellectual property policy regimes exist, and what is the room or what is the policy space that African countries have to use those regimes so that Africa can actually harness the power of innovation. So that's what this report is about. And then it asks itself, is there a region, the Indian subcontinent, which has a lot of parameters that look very much like what we have in Africa, and ASEAN, that have actually been able to harness the power of innovation to become industrialized and also to deepen their regional integration. So the report comes up with this, this finding that Actually, India has actually been able to be so successful because of what it has done in the education sector. And so the report makes clear recommendation of the importance of human capital development, including calling for reforms in the higher education sector, because you want to produce graduates that can actually innovate. And then it also realizes that the policy arena, intellectual policy arena needs harmony, and that is why the report recommends that you cannot talk about regional integration and then you have a francophone-based intellectual property organization and an anglophone-based intellectual property organization. Why don't you have an African regional intellectual property organization? And there exists a decision of the African Union towards that. So the report validates that for you to innovate, build competitiveness, you need to go to that level. And I think the final point that I would want to make on this report is that unless as a continent we take innovation seriously, then we cannot be able to make progress. So the report calls for taking advantage of the existing centers of excellence in different African countries and creating networks of centers of excellence in innovation. So it's not saying that you need to do new investments. Just take the example of what is happening in Europe, where you have different centers of excellence in different countries, and then you harness that. And that is how the report came about, talking about the desertification, the low caste, and one of them is actually based here in Ethiopia, a center of excellence that exists in the area of low caste elimination, and said, okay, if you have similar things existing in different countries, create a network. And I think we can already point to a decision or to an initiative that is moving towards that. Those of you who followed the decisions that were made during the Ebola outbreak will remember that the African countries decided that, okay, we are going to sort of create a center of, a network of centers of disease control. And I think this network of centers of disease control is a good illustration of the kind of network of centers of excellence in terms of innovation that the report is calling about.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I think we have maybe one final question. Please, can we make it quick? Okay, but really quick.
Okay, I had a question. I can see from the report we actually were looking at regional performances, but it is hard for me to actually understand, because as a continent we have the Agenda 2063, and when I look at infrastructure, I know that in Agenda 2063 we have the PIDA. So I felt, wouldn't it be easier for the report to show the region's progress towards reaching this goal? Because if PIDA wants to connect the whole continent, but I only see the East African infrastructure, I think, development, I don't understand how the region development is actually towards reaching maybe the PIDA agenda. Then I think that to me is not clear. Because, okay, another thing is, when I look at infrastructure, I understand where he came from, because we have reports like Deloitte, which actually comes up with infrastructure reports, and they are very current. So when he asked about Ethiopia's progress, and when I look at this report and it shows that Burundi is actually ahead of Kenya, it doesn't really make sense to me, when I'm actually quite, I should say, updated on that. So my question is, from this report, what is our progress towards reaching Agenda 2063 when it comes to PIDA, when it comes to continental free trade though it's not really there yet, but what's the region's progress towards reaching these goals?
Okay, thank you very much, and sir.
My question is this. Okay. My question is this. I do understand that this is the first of its kind, the first report that so I was wondering, where to from here? Are we going to push this report through to maybe push it through to the regional bodies like maybe ECOWAS and SADC in that case, or push it through to the AU, or say, okay, this is a report that we've had this report, please, these are our recommendations, try and see that you do this, you do that, or we're just going to just give the report and tell policymakers, okay, that's the report, you have to do something about that. Where to from here?
Thank you very much. Okay.
This is a collaborative work, as I understand. The World Bank, the African Development Bank, ECA, and the African Union. What is the division of labor in this respect?
All right. So I think Jean-Guy will take the first question.
Thank you, Will. The question is really spot on, and it's an issue that we discussed at the beginning, that we are still discussing now, is how to conceptually come up with a coherent framework that tracks our progress at continental level. And the reason being, we have so many protocols. You have the Africa Economic Community, you have Agenda 2063, you have the Abuja Treaty, and these are protocols. But when you actually look at the actions being taken by countries, they are more at the regional level. They are more at the level of ECOWAS, they are more at the level of EAC, they are more at the level of SADC, COMESA, IGAD, etc. And even when you look at continental level, the objectives of the African Economic Community are the results of the pillars of those of those eight communities. So it will not happen unless those 8 communities finalize their goals. So we thought that as a beginning, let us first come up with a map, a dashboard that allows us to have a picture of how those 8 regional communities are behaving. But ultimately, we definitely aim to get to where you are, what you're mentioning, which is a continental framework. And I just wanted to mention that we are not just looking at processes. We're not looking at whether we've established an African customs union, an African monetary union, etc. This index also looks a lot at the impacts that we are having in the different regions in terms of intra-regional trade, in terms of movement of people, etc. So if you look at how it helps us monitor what's going on in Agenda 2063 and the others, you'd have to dissect it. I think, for example, one clear element where we are helping with Agenda 2063 is this issue of visa requirements. A clear objective of Agenda 2063 is to abolish all visa requirements for African citizens by 2018. So if you just take that dimension of the index on free movement of people, we've now provided Africa with a tool to see whether we are moving in this Agenda 2063 direction for movement of people. I'm not saying that it can help you measure the whole of it, but definitely on some parts, it can help us address some of the elements. So it's just really that we'll definitely get to your question, because just to let you know, we are already starting to think of what kind of framework we could come up with that would allow us to give us a continental picture of where we stand in terms of regional integration. So hopefully by the next edition, you'll have something that will give you a picture of continent-wide, how much movement are we making towards the creation of one Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean-Guy. I don't know, this is the question of where do we go next with the index. I think this is probably something for us to pass to the 2 directors sitting to my right.
No, I think there was a question about infrastructure. You asked the question about Burundi versus Kenya, or Burundi versus the other members of the EAC. You asked that question. And it's a good question. and I think it's important that you go back on page 11 of the report on the index makeup. Now, if you go back to that wagon wheel, you will see that there are 4 indicators that go into that dimension. So if you are to understand the final score, then you have to look at what is the performance of each of the EAC countries on those indicators, because then they have been aggregated as a composite index. So I know where you are coming from. You are coming from the fact that in terms of infrastructure development, which in this particular case takes care of transport, electricity, ICT, that Burundi does not do, or you do not expect it to do as well as the other East African community countries. So the question is, if you go back to the data, because this is something that we have to answer on the basis of the data, do we establish that your perception is validated or not? So if you look at the web, you go to the website and everything, you'll actually see that you are right. Burundi does not do as well on that particular indicator, so which basically validates your perception that Burundi does not do very well in terms of the infrastructure development index vis-a-vis the others. However, given that Burundi does not have its own airline, it turns out that the indicator that talks about the proportion of intra-regional flights works to the advantage of Burundi, because then you have Kenya Airways, does Rwanda Air go to Burundi? So you have Kenya Airways, for instance, being able to go to that. So it's the three other indicators that are related to the demand by Burundi of those services that seem to favor it. In other words, Burundi has not created any barriers to the trade on infrastructure services. Yet, from a perception point of view, you would expect that in terms of infrastructure development, they are actually behind. It's the same explanation that you have also for IGAD. IGAD, you have 2 main airlines, Kenya Airways and Ethiopian Airlines. So when it comes to this indicator of the flights, so I think the question, what we should tell you as a team that worked on this, and that is why the methodological note is very important, is that these indicators, those 4 indicators, have actually been aggregated on the same weight. Yeah, so you have 0.25, 0.25, 0.25, 0.25 being given to each of those indicators. Had we said that the first indicator of the quality of infrastructure carries 70% of the weight, then you get different results. And I think I wanted to explain that. So any question that you have, before you take it further, it's very, very important that you look at the indicators that constitute the dimension, and then cross-check whether you agree with the data or not. I thought that's, and then where do we go from here? Like I think you heard, we do intend to sit as a technical team to see, because there is this focus on the global ranking. People want to know which of the 54 countries is at the top and which is number 54. So we are going to focus on to look at that question, which will answer the first question that you asked. That's one of the things that we are going to do. The other thing that we are going to do is, of course, to receive this kind of feedback and see what more could we improve. On the division of labor, this is a technical report. So from the conceptualization, and I think you need to look at the methodological note, because the methodological note explains the process, including how the board of the ADB and the different ministerial did this, how we went through it. So there's somebody in the African Union Commission who has been working very closely with these 2 gentlemen that you have here, but also behind them there are other colleagues from the 3 institutions who have actually been part and parcel of this. And in fact, even in terms of getting the final document, We have printed it, but the ADB has paid for the layout and all those. So it has actually been a joint effort.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think, Charles, did you? Okay, then we will close the press conference. I just wanted to make one last remark about this question of Burundi and its performance in terms of infrastructure. So maybe in one sense, to summarize what Stephen was saying, Burundi performs well because this dimension is measuring its integration into regional infrastructure networks, or rather in Burundi's case, how far it depends on the regional infrastructure networks, not quality of infrastructure per se. So thank you very much for coming, ladies and gentlemen, and we hope that you will write a very positive article. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. But okay, so thank you very much.